Hey guys, welcome back to flatpackfx. In this video, I want to walk you through how I would go about creating a very clean sort of basic design look. Now, if you're a Flatpak crew member, you can download the project file. Plus, I've also included a bonus comp. Now, if you're not already a member and you're interested in joining, then you can also check out the crew membership. There'll be a link down in the description below. Now, I continue to get a lot of videos sent through from various students asking for feedback on their work. Now, one of the very common things that I see is just a lack of sort of consistency in their design, or just the way that it feels very, overcrowded or very cluttered. So in this video, I really want to walk you through and show you that design and animation can be very basic, but it can have a profound effect or impact of your finished product. So I'm working with this drone clip. It's a bird's eye sort of view looking over an area. And what I'm going to do is just create a new comp from selection. So now I've got this clip here on the timeline. Now, what I think the first thing the way that I would approach this is really to try and give us a clean color palette. Now there's a lot going on in this. So all I did was I simply just added the tint effect to this, and that just kind of makes it black and white. Now, I didn't do anything different with that. I just applied the black and white effect. Then I also added the curves. And with the curves, what I did was I dragged right down on this to sort of make it really to kind of give it a lot of contrast. Now, you can add these just by searching for them up here and dragging them in here on top. Next, what I did was I grabbed my pen tool and I'm just going to find an area. I don't want a fill, I just want a stroke. And what I'm going to do is just sort of draw out an area here of where I want my line to sort of appear. So I'm just kind of isolating this section here. So I'm just going to kind of draw out an area like this and maybe bring this line up like that. Then what I can do is I can grab my pen tool, I'm going to click away, and then I'm going to create basically like a solid sort of overlay, but I don't want a shape path, but I don't want a stroke effect. So I'm just going to sort of create an area here. This is going to be like the highlighted area. And you can mess around with that color if you want to make it brighter. And so now what I thought it'd be interesting if I sort of highlighted that area. So you see Vox doing this sort of thing a lot. So you can change this to be like a soft light, just something like that to sort of highlight that area. Something else you can also do with this is if you duplicated the background, and then what we did is we just turned off these just so we can differentiate it. Then what I can do is I can link that via the track mat to that shape path. So it's the shape path number 2. So that means that that area is going to only appear, or that layer is only going to appear when that shape appears there. Now I can just rename these to yellow, and this is going to be my white line. And then, so that area is now going to appear there. What I can do is if I turn back on those, I can basically just kind of move these up. So that's going to kind of give me a lighter area. If I turn that yellow area back on, you can see that we've kind of got this area which just kind of stands out a little bit more. You don't have to do that, but just sort of adds that interesting effect. If you're not getting these track mat settings, just toggle this switch of modes down here. That's how you reveal that. Now, if you're interested in learning all about design and animation, then you definitely want to check out my Animation Pro course. There'll be a link down in the description. Now, this is for intermediate After Effects users, and I go much deeper into design, different techniques that you can create to create some really awesome looking animations. I cover a lot of the common techniques that you'll see through various animations online. Now, because of the level of detail that I go into, this is not a beginner course. This is really for intermediates to advanced After Effects users. If you're brand new to animation, then you want to check out my Animation Master course, and that'll walk you through the absolute basics of After Effects, right through on how to create, different sort of animations. A lot of animations that you would see online, but I walk you through from the very basics. If you've completed that course or you're more comfortable using After Effects, then check out my Animation Pro course. There'll be links to both of those courses down in the description below, along with lots of testimonials from various students that have gone through them. But both of those courses together will give you a very comprehensive overview of everything you need to know about design and animation. So now what I want to do, you'll see that it's not tracked into my scene. A really simple way of doing this is selecting your layer, coming up here, searching for the tracker, just go down to track motion. And what you're going to do is you're just going to basically track the motion. You want to basically rotation and scale. And with these little tracking points, what I would do is just kind of position them. You know, we're just going to find 2 points here that are separated, something like this. And then I'm just going to hit start, and that's going to start tracking them. If the tracks are really slipping, then you need to stop and then basically go back. So I can see here that track is a little bit off. So I can go back, make this, you can make this a little bit bigger and then just continue that track. So now we've got that track, it looks pretty good. Then I can go in here and just create a new null object. This one is going to be my tracker, and with that information that we just have, we're going to edit the target. We're going to set this to be the tracker, hit OK, and then apply. So we're going to apply the X and Y, and there you go. We've got that tracker now. Now, if I go back to my first frame, which is where the frame that I basically drew those shapes on, I can now take those and then parent them to that tracker. So now they should be all stuck to that background layer. So we don't have to do anything more with them as far as moving them around. Now we can just focus on animating them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to this and add a trims path. I'm just going to right click and make these easy ease. So we kind of end up with that line moving like that. You can also turn on motion blur for all of these layers just to help, that will help sort of just add a bit of motion blur into that. The other thing is then when this layer kind of gets to there, what I want is this yellow line to sort of then animate on. So I'm going to bring this layer in like this. And to animate this on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and add the offset path. Now, if I go down here, what I can do is drag down on this. And then I'm just going to create a keyframe there. And then as I drag up, back up to 0, you can see that kind of animates that line on. I can right click and make this easy ease just to help sort of smooth out that animation. So it's looking quite good there. I can bring this one a little bit earlier. So now that we've kind of got that area highlighted, what I want to do is sort of then have some information that sort of comes in, because part of my design here is that I've got, you know, this sort of very basic color palette going on, but you can see it's very obvious, you know, where you want the viewer to look. They're basically drawn into this yellow area here. So now I can sort of bring in some information, you know, what is it that I want them to know about that particular area. So one of the things that I've got here is this image of a building. So what I sort of did is I brought this in like this and sort of positioned it down here. You can parent this one to that tracker. And then to that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and search for the extract. I just dragged that in here. And what I did was I dragged right down on this to sort of remove the white part of that image. So I'm just kind of left with this outline effect. Then I can add the tint effect. To the white, what I've done is I've just basically flipped these. So I've basically swapped the colors, and the black one I've moved to this sort of light blue. Kind of just gives it this light little sort of tone, blue sort of tone over the top. And then over the top of that, what I did was I added the glow effect. And I just sort of set this to be about 65, 106, and just set this to make sure that it's basically behind. And that just kind of adds this interesting little glow effect. I can then create a position keyframe there and another one roughly about here. And I'm just going to animate this in very slightly, something like that. You can also just make this easy ease. The other thing that I added in my original was I added this little sort of brush title, which sort of sat in over here. Now this title I include as a bonus composition for the download project file. So that's exclusive for the flatpackfx crew members. you can see how I made that. But basically it's just like a little brush stroke here that sort of sits in over the top. Can also add motion blur on and just track that to my tracker. And then I'm going to set this to be lighten. So that just kind of gives it an interesting sort of overlay texture. The other thing I can do is just to add a bit more interest into this. With that layer underneath, so that layer which is highlighting this area, what I'm going to do is up here, I'm just going to basically swap the colors. That's going to basically just invert that color just to kind of make it a bit more different. And then what I'm also going to do is with that building layer, I can go in here and copy that glow layer, go over to my white line, paste that onto that one, and also to that yellow layer. Just kind of adds that little bit of glow, makes it much more interesting. And with that white line, something else that I also did was add a bit of a wiggle path to that. So you can do that by coming down here and under this little add button, you can add a wiggles path. Now, if you go down here and just kind of set this or leave it at 10, you get this basically like this wiggle effect on the line itself. You can make that bigger or smaller, and depending on how much sort of movement you want, but it just kind of adds a bit more life into this animation. So that's looking pretty good as it is. What I also want to do is just take that white line, hit T, and I'm just going to basically scale down on the opacity, maybe to 80%, something like that. So that looks quite good. Something else I also wanted to do is when the camera is panning across, I want to then sort of bring the camera in to sort of focus on this area of my animation, because part of the design is obviously on the wide shot, I'm trying to establish what's going on, but then in that end frame or towards the end of the video, I want to sort of then bring that, this information, make it more prominent. So it already stands out really well on the design that I've got here, especially with the colors, but I now just want to bring that camera in so I can create basically like a null object, parent all those layers underneath that are not linked to that tracker, and then select my tracker as well. So make sure that's selected and parent it to that null. So now when I get to here, what I can do is create a position property, another position keyframe, a scale keyframe, one back here, make all these easy ease, maybe bring these ones back. For these end ones, what I'm going to do is just kind of scale in slightly here and then sort of bring the camera down and across. It'll just add a little bit of that camera movement into that shot, which makes it look a lot more interesting. So some last little things that I added were really just sort of texture effects. So I added in these little sort of circles here, and these little circles were easy to create. I just basically used my ellipse tool, draw out basically like a circle here. The fill color I've kind of set to be this orange, so there's no stroke, it's just a fill. Then what I did to those is I set the blending mode to be soft light. So I just kind of drew out 3 little circles in here, basically on top of each other. I just turn off these layers, and then I set this to be soft light. So that just kind of makes them a little bit transparent, blends them in with that background. Make sure they're linked to that tracker. I also added just in some little text here. So the text was super simple. I just basically draw out a little box, paste in my text. And to this, what I do is with that text layer, I just come up here to effects and presets, select the typewriter and just drag that onto that layer. So that's how I got that little animation. I need to make sure all of those are linked to that tracker, otherwise they won't follow your video clip. But that's pretty much all I did there as far as creating those little elements. I also animated on these shape paths, so these shape layers, by using, if I come down here, an offset path. So you basically come in here and you use that offset path. We just used that before, and then you sort of animate that on from like -500 to like 0. So that just kind of animates on those little sort of circles growing. And then over the top of that, I was ready to add some texture. So one thing that I added was this color overlay. All that is basically just like a lumetri color with a bit of contrast, and the white sort of brought down, just kind of darkens over that whole image. Then I add grain over the top. So all of these you can find up here. The grain gives it texture. So I've set this to be about 1.6, and 0.6. And that's all you really need there to sort of just add that little bit of texture. Then the final thing I add is the posterized times. I right click, create another adjustment layer, and then I add the posterized time effect by searching for it, dragging it on and setting that to be 12. That's what gives it that stop motion sort of look. Vox uses this all the time in their videos, really effective. So that's it as far as the animation. The design is really simple. What I've done is just highlighted the area that I wanted to bring or, highlight out of that map. So the area I wanted the viewer to focus on. I then animate in my information, whatever information I need. I've given you some options here with maybe you want to use some different colored circles here to highlight more areas, strategic points. I've used a little image here, sort of matched it to the color scheme that I've got going on. I've used this little title to sort of deliver some information or get information across. Using just a few of these in your own work will have a massive impact on your final designs and animations. This is something that I just don't see from a lot of students. There tends to be too much stuff happening and a lot of different colors. This is not hard to do this stuff, but it adds a huge impact on your work. So that's it for this video. You can watch more videos over here on the side of the screen. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.